This is going to be a very important one because it's infrastructure, and that's why I may just okay. Then actually, let's get the panel discussion to infrastructure. The theme is reconstituting and modernizing construction, transportation, and communications industries. Folks, this is probably the most, I mean, I can't say the most important because all of them are extremely important. But in this one, I don't think of anybody better suited to actually lead the discussion than the senior economist of Rand Corporation. Dr. Shatz has been with us on several occasions, not just our economic conferences, but even security conferences and general. And sir, I hand it over to you. It's a tough task.
Thanks very much, Walter, and thanks to everybody who has come back on time. Back in a report that colleagues and I published in 2023, which was not too early to start planning for post-war reconstruction, we said that Ukraine's post-war reconstruction was likely to be the largest post-war rebuilding effort in modern history. And at the heart of this is going to be transportation and communications networks. These are the sinews not only of the modern economy of commerce, but of daily life. So they really do double duty. Ukraine is already on solid footing with both. So let's take transport. When you ride the train from Przemysl into Ukraine, into Kyiv Central Station, the railway announcement comes on as the train pulls in that Ukraine Railways has not missed a day of service. And they look forward to taking you in the future to Crimea and Donbass. Communications, you heard as well in the previous panel, Jock talked about the fiber optic network. But there's much more that can and needs to be done. So if we look at the damage, the most recent damage and needs assessment, which goes for damage through the end of 2025, transport was the second largest sector in terms of damage. Almost 21% of all damage in Ukraine was from the transport sector. Telecom was much less, but then telecom infrastructure is also less costly. Transport damage has included rail, road, bridges, ports, airports, air navigation system, and urban public transit. And it's included local oblast, village, and communal roads. In fact, if we look at economic losses, so what is all the business that could have been done between February 24th, 2022 and December 31st, 2025, and even looking about 18 months into the future, 60% of those losses were from the loss of transit through Black Sea ports. So again, we come to transportation. As we prepare for reconstruction, there are a number of principles to keep in mind. So transportation and communications investments are large fixed investments. They need legal security and they need contract security. In fact, so I mentioned the report we did, we briefed it around to US, EU, NATO officials. Consistently, one of the top two questions we received were, what about corruption in Ukraine? What about rule of law? This will be very important. Second, there's already a complex regulatory environment. Ukraine is sprinting to prepare to meet EU membership requirements. This involves a wholesale reform of laws, so investors will need to be aware of those changes. Third issue is manpower and skills. If we look at construction sector, there's going to be a need for a workforce. That was the second question we always received. What about the return of refugees? Is Ukraine going to have the manpower to achieve its economic goals? We heard about the financing that's on tap, and it looks like that financing is secure at least for a while. And we heard as well from the first panel about how all of this is going to be paid for. Let's move on to hear from our experts. I'm not going to introduce them. If you get bored during the session, you can look at their biographies, or you can wait till after the session. If you get extremely bored during the session, you can start looking at email and X and whatever Telegram networks you're on. Okay. But I want to start with Roman, and we mentioned business climate, anti-corruption is essential. How has the business climate, the legal environment evolved, and what's the stance of the current government?
Thank you very much, Howard. Professor Hughes talked about a major problem in Ukraine being remnants of war, things that you're wandering around and suddenly it blows up in front of you, or you with it. one of the other problems is remnants of Sovok, remnants of Soviet thinking. You launch into a project and suddenly something blows up, which is really either a regulatory or psychological remnant of the Soviet period, or this is kind of a Ukrainian, unique to Ukraine situation, a kind of a Franken-Sovok, Euro-Franken-Sovok, you could call it, which is basically an attempt by Western donors to solve a problem which makes sense to them in their own terms, but in the Ukrainian situation, based on legacy thinking, gets transformed sometimes into the opposite of what project funders intended. And the anti-corruption field is one of those areas where things sometimes go awry. I was for 4 years from January of 2022, so just before full-scale invasion, to January of 2026. This year, Business Ombudsman of Ukraine. And to come back to the remnants metaphor, we were sort of like a UXB, unexploded psychological ordnance or regulatory ordnance demining team, working both on individual cases, but then also systemic approaches to how you can reduce the risk. Prior to that, I had for 5 years been ambassador of Canada to Ukraine, and in that role, pushing a whole range of projects from rule of law to civil society to economic development, all sorts of things. But there's something that may look like Captain Obvious stuff to people like you sitting here in a law firm environment, but which I somehow managed to not notice in 5 years of being ambassador of Canada. And that is the Ukrainian approach to administrative law, anything to do with government, which is almost the opposite of Anglo-American approaches to these things. So basically, to explain, our assumption is that whatever is not forbidden is allowed. And that in Ukraine is true in criminal law. It's true by and large in civil law, but not in the case of administrative law. And again, I was running a team of 20 Ukrainian lawyers, and they beat this into me very quickly because I kept saying these things which to them seemed entirely naive and wrongheaded, which is that Ukrainian administrative law, as it is interpreted now, or misinterpreted sometimes, operates on the assumption that whatever is not written down is prohibited. If you do something that has not been foreseen in a law or regulation, you are liable as a public servant or as a contact of a public servant. This is sort of Ukraine underwent administrative law reform where they adopted largely sort of German-based administrative law codes, but interpreted through a sort of post-Soviet prosecutorial mind. And if in the UK, for example, and not sure about here in the US, there's this approach to public policy and public decision-making called judge over your shoulder. In other words, if I sign this decision, will it stand up in a court of law or will it get into trouble? In Ukraine, it's more like prosecutor over your shoulder. If I, as public official, sign here, will I be locked up when something changes in 6 months or a year from now? That's an underlying reality, both partially legal, partly interpretive. And once you figure it out, you then begin to understand why all of your government and government-related interlocutors are behaving the way they behave. We may believe this is the wrong approach, but it simply is the approach for the moment. Once you find, and I think Jock was absolutely right to say that you need to lawyer up well in local Ukrainian terms. You need to find excellent accountants who know all of Ukraine's complex, again, post-Soviet meets complex European and global accounting needs requirements. These people will help you navigate. Once you figure out the logic, it kind of works in its own way. But coming into it with a strictly kind of North American-based, I've got this all figured out attitude is inviting trouble. So in our work at Business Ombudsman Council, we worked on individual complaints from companies, but we also created a new unit in 2023-24 called Policy and Recovery, which was trying to anticipate the problems of full-scale recovery by working on the incipient in-war, if you will, recovery projects that are already underway, to try and make sure that we fix in dealing with the current problems and mitigate and prevent even bigger problems that may come up with full-scale reconstruction. One of the areas that we addressed, and I think with a degree of success, was construction. The old approach to state-backed construction, that includes funded by the budget or anything relating to the budget. So state-owned corporations, for example, you want to drill a new well for Ukranafta, the state-owned oil corporation, meant that that approach was based on minimal wage requirements being interpreted as maximum wages allowable. You may ask, how could this happen? Again, Ukraine has got too many institutions, and too many of them are in various states of reform. So different eras kind of end up layering on top of each other. Somebody passed a law saying construction workers shouldn't be exploited, so there should be a minimum wage. Then the state audit service pops up, and they see their job as making sure that not a single hryvnia of excess hryvnia is spent. So they come and audit your project, and they say, well, you paid your construction workers 2,000 hryvnia a month more than the minimum. That's stealing from the state. Launch a criminal case against whoever signed off on it. Therefore, everyone pretends to pay the minimum until last year, at which point you then can't do the project. The workers won't show up. What do? You hide those costs in other parts of the contract. But then the anti-corruption authorities show up and say, how come you're overpaying for asphalt? We could buy the asphalt more cheaply at our local hardware store. What's up? Another Ukraine corruption story goes out into the world, whereas the actual package of money devoted to that infrastructure project was perfectly adequate, perfectly normal. But it was improperly distributed because of weirdly interpreted legal rules. So our organization worked in 2024-25 with a government working group, and in November of last year, 2025, new rules allowing for a more market-based pricing of construction, both construction work and construction materials, was adopted. And in fact, the government explanation on how to interpret the rules was issued today, April 29th. It's on the website of the Ministry of Infrastructure. Attitude of the government, solutions-based. But there are a lot of solutions to be found. So it takes time. It takes systematic work. It takes the willingness to deal with stuff that appears arcane and boring. Of course, that's what law firms are really good at. So considerable potential there. And so fixing these problems is possible, but it can't be done by simply saying, foreign investor coming in and saying you have to overturn your whole way of doing things. That won't work. It means incrementally adjusting it, and it means working with construction rules like FIDIC rules, which are the international rules, but which in turn aren't entirely harmonized with European Union rules. So again, there are levels of complexity that your legal, accounting, project management team has to deal with. And again, Prime Minister Sviridенko, very open to hearing about problems and tasking groups to resolve them. The existence of an entity like Business Ombudsman Council, my successor is the former German ambassador, Anke Feldhusen, very, very aware of all the practicalities of working in Ukraine, also very well connected. She was ambassador until 2023. So knows the wartime situation, knows how to deal with this. So there are institutions in place, both in government and in the case of Business Ombudsman Council, independently funded through the EBRD, willing to advise and help business, both local and international, do its work. So not the most straightforward, but with both government and business and internationally supported institutions willing to approach the resolution of problems, and in the course of months, years of collaborative work, solving them and helping things move forward.
Thank you, Roman. Well, today I learned about the Business Ombudsman Council, so my life has been enriched, and I hope that holds for everyone. There are few investments that I can think of that are larger than major port projects, generally with contracts lasting into years. And Jon, our next speaker, Jon, has been very involved with ports in Ukraine. So perhaps you can tell us about the future of ports in Ukraine, and what are the challenges of creating a new port in Ukraine on which the economy will depend heavily.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. My name is Jon Queen. I'm the CEO of the Berezan Port Project, and I'm with Sunpro Group, who's one of the organizers of this conference. And I would just like to take a quick second on behalf of our main shareholder, Pavlo Chamak, who's unfortunately unable to be here today due to illness, but he's very pleased that we're all able to get together, and he's very inspired by all of the energy and the ideas and the passion that everyone has for Ukraine. This is exactly the sort of conference that gives us the energy and the confidence to proceed with what we're doing. Because if you look at where Ukraine is right now and where Ukraine will be in the future, the key to that, as Jacques spoke at a previous panel and stuff, is business. We are the connector between what is and what will be, because we are kind of creating the economic future that everyone hopes to achieve. And a key, if you look at Ukraine's kind of economy as like a body, the veins that go through that body that pump the blood and get things from organ to organ is the logistical chain. And a key part of that is river ports as well as Black Sea ports. So I'm here to discuss about that today. Sunpro Group, which Berezan Port is a part of, we are a diversified company. Our key business is sunflower oil production in Ukraine, and as a result of that, we've developed into ancillary businesses. We have a wind power business. We have now a banking institution in Luxembourg, and we got into the port business as a result of the needs that we experienced and the challenges we experienced in Ukraine as a sunflower oil producer. So we currently own a port on the river in Ukraine, which I'll get into really briefly, called Bread Pier. And then we have our ambitious project to bring Ukraine into the 21st century, Black Sea shipping logistics, which is this Berezan Port project, which I will touch upon. So can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so again, this is just a quick overview on Sunpro. As I mentioned, we've got sunflower oil, we've got wind power generation, we've got sunflower meal grain storage. We also have finance in Luxembourg. And I would also like to say that a large part of our activities and growth have happened during wartime. So we have not shied away and kind of put our money away while things are happening. So in addition to dealing with the day-to-day conflicts of running a business and the challenges that come with an economy in wartime, we're also leaning in to try to keep pushing ahead and not just wait for the war to end before we start doing something. Next slide, please. So if we look at, and we can go to the next slide as well. So this, I'll briefly touch upon the existing port that we have in Mykolaiv. So we have a port that we actually bought from the government called the Bread Pier, Chlebny Prichal. And it's strategically located in Mykolaiv, Ukraine. Historically, it was heavily used by some of the foreign commodities trading companies for their grain storage and transfer activities. Next slide, please. So in terms of how this port actually looks, if I'm not just describing it in abstract, I mean, we're talking about a 450-meter port with a carrying capacity of 15,000 tons and up to 30,000 tons of additional loading capacity. And it has the existing infrastructure already on it. So we have cranes, we have loading, and we have our own customs zone. Next slide, please. We are currently in kind of a martial law period on the rivers, and so what we're talking about is kind of the pre-war activity of this port, as well as what we anticipate the post-war activity of this port being at minimum. And so this is a significant port where we turn over, well, we used to turn over and will turn over 2 million tons a year, where it breaks down, you know, the different types of commodities that are traded through. Next slide, please. And specifically, when you look at Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe, why these ports are important? Well, part of that is obviously agriculture and grain transportation from Ukraine to other countries along different shipping routes. And so this port is no exception. This is historically what it was mainly used for. And as a sunflower kind of company, this is also of it was core interest to us when we were looking at to acquire. Next slide, please. And if you look at our business in sunflower oil, so it obviously has oils terminal, but this also can be looking at different types of oils as well over time. If we look at biofuel, if we look at you know, other types of liquids that would be transferred up and down the river, we have basically the storage facility for this, as well as a tanker fleet to deliver it. Next slide, please. So again, people are looking now at what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Iran, the Strait of Hormuz. What do fuel transfers look like in the future? Well, it is possible that Ukraine could become a significant kind of piece of the LNG puzzle. And so in anticipation of that, we are considering, you know, expanding that capacity at the river port as well. Next slide, please. If we look at the most ambitious project in Sunpro's portfolio, it's this Berezan port. So this is a multi-year effort. This is an integrated industrial hub, not just a large port, which will have the deepest berthing and one of the largest capacities of all Ukrainian ports or Black Sea ports in general, but it will really bring Ukraine into the 21st century in shipping logistics in terms of having a tax advantage duty-free zone, an industrial zone next to it for reindustrializing, you know, some of Ukraine's lost heavy industry capacity, where you'll be able to build it in a tax advantage zone right next to where the shipping can be. And we're really talking about kind of privatized modern customs. This is a private port. So both the bread pier that I discussed previously and this, we're always thinking about how to streamline the user experience from shipping in terms of ease of loading, unloading, dealing with customs, simplicity of customs, and paying as little tax as possible. So this is all core to where we envision Ukraine's 21st century position. If you look at it as being a potential, well, almost certain member of the EU, potentially a very important part of that, these ports are going to really help solidify that role and keep Ukraine on the map. Next slide, please. So I just discussed this. This is going to be it's a large project. It's not just a port, but an industrial hub with rail, air, and sea connectivity and a tax-free zone for the industry that will be using the port. Next slide, please. The location where all this is, we're talking about the Mykolaiv area. It's a strategic area that's kind of weather protected. It historically was an old Soviet submarine base back in the Soviet times. So it's, you know, it's got to proven. We'll have to deepen the channel slightly, but it traditionally was a very deep channel, and it is strategically and ecologically advantaged for doing the type of large activity we're doing here, and we're not near a large residential center. So in terms of the size and scope of this, we're talking about 15 miles of kind of the port length, 120 million tons of annual cargo capacity. Again, as I mentioned, a huge industrial zone where we're hoping to attract billions of dollars of business and factories to help reindustrialize Ukraine in its post-war era. And it's going to be an all-in-one hub. So you have rail, air, and sea as well. Next slide, please. And where this is, so if you look at Ukraine, both now and in the future, we're in the dead center of Europe. So we're a key strategic kind of link that can link the Baltic states to Europe and beyond. And it can be a key part of the 3Cs initiative, which brings together, the EU countries and is supported by the United States. Next slide, please. So again, this one's a little bit granular, so I'm not going to go into deep detail, but if you look at where Berezan port is all the way at the bottom there, number 14, you see a bunch of key ports that are upstream of that. So we are, as addition to being kind of climate and ecologically advantaged and locationally advantaged, we're also well advantaged for the existing infrastructure in terms of how Ukraine moves goods in and out of the country on the river ports. Next slide, please. If we're talking about the tax-free zone, we view that as kind of the key to all this, is to make this a port of choice, not just for Ukraine, but hopefully once Ukraine's in the EU, for regional players as well. And this is an ongoing process we're having with the Ukrainian government. We are blessed with having our government representative, Mykola Vizir, here today, who can answer any kind of technical questions on that, as well as we have our global head of business development, Ivan Zadaplayev. And so during the break, if you have technical questions or questions about the project, we are absolutely interested to talk to you about that and can go into great detail. So this is our project in brief. It's an ambitious project, but so is everything in Ukraine. And ones that aren't ambitious are not really worth doing, if we're going to be honest with you. I mean, we're here to, if you're not dreaming big, you're really limiting yourself. And so we believe that in 10 years, we'll be talking about the project operations and not the project construction. And so we're happy to be here today to talk now.
Thank you, John. So thinking big is necessarily a part of thinking of reconstruction in Ukraine. I was at a panel discussion in 2024, again, not too early to think about post-war reconstruction in Ukraine, where we had a representative of what I thought was a European construction company talking about their plans at the time. It turns out, I looked them up afterwards, they're a subsidiary of a US company. The Europeans have a leg up on this through their funding, through the EU accession process, but there's certainly much that the US can contribute and much that will benefit the US. And I'd like to turn to Davis to talk to us about US opportunities in this area and whatever else he'd like to talk about.
Great. Well, thank you so much. First off, I want to acknowledge just how much this ecosystem has changed even within the past 4 months. A little bit of background about myself. I am the founder and CEO of America-Ukraine Strategic Partners. We're focused primarily on integrating Ukrainian defense tech into the US defense industrial base. But we also have submitted some proposals to Alvarez and Marcel and DFC, and are in quite close touch with the Ministry of Economy in Ukraine about reconstruction projects. But 4 months ago in December, when we approached economic development corporations here in the United States about Ukrainian companies coming over here and setting up either manufacturing facilities or new companies and joint ventures in the US, nobody had any idea what was going on. We had to explain to the US military why what is going on in Ukraine is existential, not just for Europe or Ukraine, but really for the United States to stay up to date with what's going on the battlefield. And then a few months pass, and then all of a sudden you have everything that's breaking out in the Middle East, and the US is scrambling to put together new practices around procurement. Simultaneously, you're starting to see the contours of the reconstruction framework start to hit. The joint fund just announced, one of the speakers touched on it earlier, but Sign Engineering, absolutely amazing Ukrainian company. John Lonsdale's 8VC has also invested in them. So you are starting to see the intermingling of US and Ukrainian capital, and these institutions start to form and actually start to have an impact. Simultaneously, while we're here today, There are two other conferences going on right now. Concordia in Dallas, a significant portion of their programming is devoted to the reconstruction of Ukraine. And in Copenhagen, there's the Alliance of Democracy, which when I was there last year, the entire conference was on the reconstruction of Ukraine. So I think at this point, I mean, people tend to refer to reconstruction and defense of Ukraine as an ecosystem. I think it's its own industry right now. You have entire, publications that have come up around just defense in Ukraine. And you have publications, UBN News, that have come up just around the reconstruction of Ukraine. There are conferences like this going on. Everything to me points to, that this is a major, international and global industry, and not just a cottage industry that it appeared a couple of years ago with the same cliche on, Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Well, they say the same thing about Syria, Marshall Plan for Syria and the Middle East. On the U.S. side, I don't think you can rule out the role that the EDCs are going to play with these Ukrainian companies coming to the U.S. Again, when we went to El Paso and some of the other ones in December, there was a reluctance, but we're now starting to move forward with our own proposals. Interestingly, there's a conference going on next week in D.C. by a great Ukrainian organization, U-Force, and a great group based out of the Odessa region. And what I noticed the most is the role of economic development corporations being there. Baltimore has a prime speaking slot with it, which means that it's not just the federal and the Trump administration and these high political players that are making these moves and putting the implementation of DFC into effect. It's local municipalities here in the United States, and these control local and state funding with a wide variety of political leniencies from these local leaders. It's going to be very instrumental in terms of grants to come here and set up manufacturing facility, as well as tax incentives to come and open up factories here. So the role of EDCs with Ukrainian companies and US companies that are serving to bridge that gap cannot be understated in my opinion. And I just think it's a really exciting time to be in this space. That being said, this is still a war that impacts very real people. Our company has been to Ukraine roughly a dozen times since the full-scale invasion. We're invested in a number of cultural preservation initiatives in frontline communities such as Sumy, Kharkiv. We've done events with Ambassador Zaluzhny in the United Kingdom. To us, it's very important. If you want to be involved in reconstruction, you need to be involved in defense. If you want to be involved in defense, you have to work with civic society and art and culture, and actually having an understanding of the communities which you're looking to impact. And you ultimately need the buy-off of those communities if you want to do anything in reconstruction. So to us, that's always been a very important part of this. And I don't think that we can lose sight of the fact that these are real people. And as much as this has ballooned into a multi-billion-dollar industry at this point, we can't lose sight of that. We can't lose sight of the soldiers on the front lines who are fighting for our values, and as well as the families who have lost loved ones to the war crimes being committed by the Russian military. So thank you for having me today, and it's a privilege to be here. Thanks, Walter.
Great. Thanks, Davis. So as moderator, I have the right of first questions, but I'm not going to take that right. I'd much rather hear from the audience. I just want to add one other thing about communications industry, because we haven't really covered that. And I note that Ukraine is a real leading edge on many different things. But one of them, as I think most of you know, is the DIA app, which has increased connectivity, not just for government services, but for business government relations. And this relies on a telecommunications backbone. Government official from the previous administration who was heavily involved with this really viewed Ukraine as one of the top 4 countries in terms of programmers. And so there's quite good opportunity on the communications infrastructure. And this is something where Ukraine can really lead the world in taking advantage of communications backbone, which would merit more investment in the country. Let me go to questions. As one of my favorite moderators used to say, you do not have to disguise your comment as a question. We will respond to comments, but please keep it brief. Who wants to go first? Yes, please. And please, I'm going to do something a little different. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Carl Valenstein. I'm a partner at Morgan Lewis and have done transactional and finance work in Ukraine. For infrastructure projects that could potentially be targets during the ongoing conflict, how are you addressing insurance issues? Is there insurance available at any kind of reasonable cost, and how important is that to address?
As was discussed on a previous panel, I mean, there are solutions, but they're not, I wouldn't say they're all comprehensive. In terms of our own activities, in terms of the Sunpro group, we have started a insurance application with DFC. That process is ongoing. DFC provides, that type of coverage, and they have some representatives here who can speak to that if that is of interest to you or your clients, for sure.
Also, related to DFC, which has been a very positive player here, they have provided reinsurance to a number of Ukrainian market leading insurance companies for smaller bits of coverage. So if you're in the kind of up to $50 million range, that there are Ukrainian companies like ARX, et cetera, which is Canadian owned. Little plug there. Sorry. So there is also now a bit of an ecosystem which involves going directly to DFC, but also to private operators who have reinsurance from them.
So I did the first DFC. The first DFC political risk insurance project in Ukraine in 2018, but I am not. Are they open for insurance under this administration?
I certainly hope so. We have an application with them.
I hope so too.
Echoing those statements, and I hear you on that, and I think everybody on this panel and everyone in this room knows that a lot of major players have had their projects stalled up in DFC for several years now, even before the current administration. That being said, I think, from the activity that we're seeing in the Middle East, there's been a push to have more of an expedited process, especially as it relates to LNG transactions and having separate tracks open with XM Bank for those. Our experience with DFC has been they want us to bring in additional investors when we do come in with a proposal, and that's ultimately what strengthens it. So I think a lot of people are going around the space right now, more or less, with very similar projects, similar names attached to it. But I do think that it's going to come down to who do investors really trust to execute those, and what does the operating and management team looks to actually instill faith into why these projects should be issued PRI in the first place.
I'll take the privilege of adding a bit more. So insurance has been a bit of a sad story with this. The 2023 London Recovery Conference, there was a very big announcement that the assembled governments were going to make a major effort on pushing forward war risk insurance. That fizzled within several months. And what we're seeing now is there are individual efforts. We heard about US efforts. World Bank also has had a small effort. France and Germany, and the German effort has reportedly been particularly good. So there are small efforts out there, but still nothing comprehensive living up to the promise of what was spoken of at the London Recovery Conference. Next question. Yes, please, Walter.
I actually will. Question about comparing what in terms of construction and reconstruction, the efforts, is there an industry that's now been developing, or a set of industries that do repair work? Is there, are they cognizant of the fact that they're going to be in the business for a while? And what percentage of what's going on in Ukraine, if anybody can give me that percentage, is simply to repair everything that's being damaged? And what is industry that's moving forward? I know that in the defense industry, and I'm actually looking at the Ombudsman first, but I think that the others, Davis and John, can probably answer that as well.
Go ahead, Roman.
So give you a practical example. Windows. These are things that get blown out a lot in this war. And so current manufacturers, both local and German ones that are located in Ukraine, have been working to meet that demand. But Ukraine has no national capacity for producing flat glass. They've got glass factories, but they produce bottles, not flat glass. So this guy named Ihor Liski, serial entrepreneur, is working with big Western companies to launch Ukraine's first flat glass factory. So that's an example of like immediate needs are being met, but largely through import. Whereas a Ukrainian business is setting up building a factory to meet what they anticipate to be the much bigger demand coming up. Similarly, actually, Saint-Gobain, the French construction materials group, has set up a gyprock plant in Ukraine, also with this in mind.
I mean, just really briefly, I think if you're talking about repair work in Ukraine right now, the front line of that is actually the energy sector, because they are the critical targets. And so I can't speak with specificity as to those numbers, but I'm sure that Jacques and others can. In terms of just going with what Roman said, in terms of Ukraine's reconstruction, in terms of the remont, or however in English, like the repair work, yes, that's going to be a core industry. You need glass, you need concrete, you need rebar, you need all of these things. And those businesses will probably, a lot of that's imported now, and it will be more domestically produced. I think that's going to be an early opportunity for people in terms of growth industries to service that domestic demand.
Yeah, I would just add and echo the points on defense and energy, especially with the attacks this past winter on critical infrastructure, and needing to actually be able to dig deep under the surface to obscure a lot of this from attacks by the Russian military.
Thanks. Next question over here. I need a microphone, and please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Noreen McDonald, Rain Cloud Group, Rain Cloud Defense, Rain Cloud Ukraine. I'm going to be speaking about our project later, but just wanted to follow on the questions, comments about insurance and investors. So we are working with Marsh, who I believe has been very active in Ukraine on recalibrating war risk insurance around their very wide and deep interests around participating in reconstruction. So I think there'll be more from Marsh coming soon around the reconstruction efforts and how to meet the challenges that you mentioned. And then secondly, around investment, we're working with a group of a network of ultra high net worth individuals. Oh, I should have said I'm Canadian and I live in Abu Dhabi, because I was just about to say that's a very American term, who are interested in, as Jacques said earlier, acting now, investing now, and figuring out ways to work through the type of challenges that Ombudsman mentioned. And their interests are defense sector. Absolutely, we're seeing a huge sweep into defense sector investment from people who have not been involved before, because they see, it's high risk but high return. Infrastructure projects as the very important project that was mentioned, engineering projects, agriculture projects. So those families are industrial families themselves, who have their own industrial verticals, and they're interested in how they can apply their expertise, their networks, and their industrial strength in the reconstruction moment. So I think there's a lot to back up everything that was said. Thank you.
Thanks. That's very helpful to know. Yes, please. And microphone. And even though you spoke already, identify yourself again.
I have a very brief question. We hear a lot about war risks, expensive insurances. I have not seen any data published by the Ukrainian authorities or anybody else. Very important, the actual risk being destroyed. What's the probability that you factor in 1%, 10%?
Not publicly shared, but the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council has, since about 2 years, been exchanging information with the insurance industry about sort of granular locality hits. In other words, if you're the companies, and I think partly you were referring to that, if you are in Village X, you may be paying 3 times less in premiums because the likelihood of that place being hit based on past data is much less than in a certain other region. So it's not public, but there is an information exchange between the authorities and the local insurance industry.
I've been at one of those briefings. It is very detailed. Those of you who are experts, which we are not, approximately 80% of the country has a very low risk profile. And then if you're working in the other 20% of the company, it's an extremely detailed profile around certain types of risk. And the insurance is actually available. It's just a question of how the risk is managed, et cetera. So you wouldn't want anybody to be deterred from moving forward on doing business in Ukraine because they cannot manage that risk. You can. It's just a question of whether you're interested in paying the premiums or not. And obviously the upside to investment in Ukraine, even in those areas that are subject to high war risk, is very significant. So it's just another cost of doing business.
I would just like to really briefly add just 30 seconds on that. I mean, as a business, when you're thinking about the impact of the Russian attacks on Ukraine, I think you can look at it in 2 ways. One is the actual risk of being physically hit by a drone or some type of aerial bombardment, which is terrible, and some companies are really experiencing that in the front lines. The second is one that I think affects all companies, especially ones with large numbers of staff and employees, and that is the mobilization of your workforce. So if you talk about a reconstruction project, as was questioned, like you can develop the glass, but do you have the team of people that will be able to install the glass? You can have a large factory. Do you have the workforce to service that factory reliably on a monthly basis, or are they going to be mobilized due to the nature and the needs domestically? So I would say there's one piece of the puzzle, and it's a very important piece, but then there's the whole piece, the whole iceberg below the water, which is potentially uninsurable, but is a direct related cost of all of this to business.
Last question, and please identify yourself. And
Tom McDevitt, Chairman of the Washington Times. Great panel, by the way. My question is in the area of public diplomacy and communications. I echo Jon Queen's thought in the very beginning that this conference represents gives you the energy and the confidence to move forward with a vision. If you look at the mindset of the American public in general and opinion leaders, what are your comments on the role of public diplomacy and strategic communications to tell the story of the future hopes of rebuilding Ukraine? I'm especially interested in Mr. Richardson with your background in PR and media.
Thank you very much. In addition to OSP, I oversee the U.S. communications firm Paradox Public Relations. We're registered under FARA and work very closely with the Ukrainian government's Brave One initiative. In my perspective, there's been a total communications failure with all administrations, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, and even the Zelensky administration, to foster strong bonds and connections between both countries. One of the biggest missed opportunities that I see right now relates on the Ukrainian government side to the horrific and tragic killing of the young Ukrainian woman in North Carolina. Now, this was an issue that got all of the anti-Ukraine folks of MAGA enthusiastic. And you have Elon Musk, where even though he's involved with Starlink and providing a lot of support to Ukraine, has also echoed some very anti-Ukrainian comments. And you have him painting murals of this woman in major American cities. And this was a Ukrainian woman. And this is someone that is espousing not to give any more U.S. aid to Ukraine. If I were the Zelensky administration, I would seize on something like that to actually go and forge, bonds and relationships. I think the silver lining to the Trump administration has been the role of DFC and actually having business and trade in the region. The failure under the Biden administration was that there was never a clear articulation of what the policy objectives were and how what's going on in Ukraine is also connected with Israel. So I think, unfortunately, this is going to be entirely driven by the private sector, but with some very solid frameworks that are put in place with the cooperation between both governments. But I'd really like to see better communication as someone that also works alongside the Ukrainian government and working on these narratives about the defense industry.
Can I just respond to this gentleman's comment? So I'm the president of the Ukrainian Cultural Center in Buffalo, and we were approached. I don't think I need it. We were
Use the mic and use the mic.
We were
use the mic.
Excuse me. Promoter.
Excuse me.
Elon Musk.
Stop.
Mural.
Use the mic and say your name.
Emil Bandriowski, Buffalo, New York. So we were approached by the promoter of the arena murals because we have a huge building. But we were skeptical about it because we thought maybe it would be a political, I don't know, a ploy or something like that, similar to the way that when Ambassador Makarova went to the weapons factory in Pennsylvania, it was, played, it became an American domestic political issue as opposed to being a Ukraine-American international issue. So I guess there's always many sides to this item. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, the local politics is often indistinguishable from nationwide and even international. I do think that you need to talk to people, and I do think that cultural diplomacy, in the absence of weighing into something which does touch on partisan politics, like what you're describing, cultural diplomacy also plays a very important role. So, we did the closing reception during Defense Tech Valley in Lviv with Ambassador Julie Davis, and showing her and the U.S. Embassy some amazing pieces of artwork from Ukrainian artists. I think that all of it needs to come together, but you can't just stop talking to people because you think that they may have some ulterior political agenda. I'd say on the point that you mentioned on the factory, I'd say the biggest mistake is that President Zelensky didn't visit Trump in Mar-a-Lago. When Biden was in office. And I don't want to weigh in on the politics side of it, but I do think that there are these things that bring people together, whether that's MAGA in Ukraine that everyone's sleeping on right now.
Thank you, Davis. Last word before me to Roman.
I'm from just north of Buffalo. And so this will be my passive-aggressive Canadian moment here again. But I think you need to realize, because as people here in the financial center of the world and the United States, your assumption is that all options are open, but you are torching so many of your own options. From a public advocacy point of view, the last 3 years have been atrocious. I have known Marie Yovanovitch. I have known Bridget Brink. I've known Julie Davis. These are the natural advocates. They're ambassadors for the U.S. Their fate means that you will be, despite all the amazing advantages of being the U.S., you may find that a Finnish company that is being fully supported by President Stubb and has all of the instruments aligned, as opposed to the instruments sort of fighting each other or people having to think mural, no mural, that's a problem. Other countries have different problems, but you have a particular problem set that may not be so evident in the internal U.S. Discussion, but if you compare it to what the Germans are doing now, who are going big on Ukraine, spending basically the people who are making up for the, apart from DFC zero happening on the U.S. side in terms of both budgetary and military support for Ukraine, those countries all are also pursuing their own interests and reconstruction interests. And with the European Union, they've also got the regulatory impact of membership discussions. So I think, not to discourage anyone, but you need to be particularly robust in your preparations and draw on the advantages you have, which is huge capital markets and an international private sector brand that is very strong.
Thank you, Roman. That was a necessary tonic. The opportunity is there. Yeah, and I should say, I'm from Buffalo. We are in solidarity with our northern neighbors. The opportunity is there, and it's not just in agricultural resources or military technology. It's broad based, and the question for the United States and for players in the United States is how to move in effectively. I'll hand the floor over to Walter. Thank you. We're 6 minutes over time, but